Okay. Rabbi Serrata, do you want to lead us off with the shofar blow?
I certainly will. And as you said, every day during the month of Elul, it's a custom to blow the shofar for a couple of reasons. I think one is to remind us that the holy days are coming. And the other reason was in Jewish folklore, it was to confuse the evil eye, right? So the evil eye wouldn't actually know which day Rosh Hashanah was, because you keep blowing the shofar every day. So that's just a little piece of folklore, but we'll give it a shot.
Yasher Koach. We're ready in the month of Elul. And Rabbi Moffic, we're ready for you. You need to unmute and we're ready to go.
Well, hello, everybody. It's nice to see all of you. Oh, let me pull up my notes here. I got a whole bunch of notes here because this is.
I didn't give the traditional introduction. And if there's anyone on here who doesn't know Rabbi Moffic, please send me a message and I will send you his biography. And go.
Well, I think this topic is of such interest, and this is every certain number of years. There's no set schedule. But the Pew Forum, which is sort of a nonprofit that studies religion, does all kinds of demographic studies and so forth, it does a study of American Jews. By the way, it does this for other religions too. It looks at their, numbers. It asks a series of different questions. Oftentimes, the questions reflect some of the issues that are currently hot and important in any community. It'll survey Christians, it'll survey Muslims, it'll survey Hindus, it'll survey African Americans, Asian. It's sort of a sociological organization, and for Jews this is especially important because the Jewish community is tiny. I mean, we know that it's a small community, and yet it's a influential community, and influential for a variety of reasons. Some of it is, level of success, level of income and wealth. Some of it is demographics, where Jews are located. Jews tend to be in big cities, and so influence the cultural life of big cities for election reasons. And also in terms of all the Jewish charities and synagogues and all of that need to know what numbers look like, so we can decide where to allocate resources. These are huge. That's why all the federations in different cities do demographic surveys every year, because you need to know what are the needs of the community, where are people moving to, what are people interested in, all these are important questions for understanding how we allocate resources and how we build for the future. And so the last Pew study was in 2013. I remember doing a whole class on it. And these studies, the discoveries impact Jewish life. Most famously, in 1990, so I think Rabbi Ike was my rabbi then, back in Milwaukee. And I don't know if maybe he gave a sermon or a drash on it, but there was a very famous.
No, he was at Lake. Oh wait,
was he at Lakeside by then?
Oh no,
1990.
No, you're right. He
may not have even been in Milwaukee by then.
Yeah,
it may have been a couple. So, anyways, there was a famous survey in 1990 that found that the intermarriage rate had reached 51%, and the Jewish establishment, that is, the kind of mainstream groups like, the federations, the American Jewish Committee, the Union for Reform Judaism, all these organizations kind of freaked out, and they're like, oh my God, what have we been doing wrong? And there was a whole movement towards Jewish continuity. And Jewish continuity was funding organizations that promote Jewish, essentially Jews marrying and being with other Jews. This was what Hillel did. This is where Birthright Israel originally came from. Now, Birthright's changed its mission a lot, but all of these were responses to this. Now, obviously, that if you define success by reducing the intermarriage rate, all of these programs have been a colossal failure. I mean, so because the 2010 and then or 2013, there was a 2013 Pew. It found that the intermarriage rate among non-Orthodox is now at 73%. So clearly, if you're defining success by reducing that rate, it's been a failure. Now, I don't define success that way, and I think probably most of us don't either. But the point I'm trying to make is these surveys have an impact on how we allocate resources and what our focus should be and how we plan for the future. So having said all that, what was discovered in the most recent Pew survey? Now, this is very, very interesting. And there are a couple of major discoveries. The first is, and this should come as no surprise to anybody because this is true among Christian communities well, but affiliation and identification with mainstream liberal religious organizations is declining. There's no way around it. It is declining. And that's true in liberal. And by the way, for the first time, it's also true in the evangelical Christian community, but connection, it's not as pronounced a decline in the evangelical community, but it's declining there too. But affiliation with mainstream religious, the traditional religious organizations is declining, and it's declining pretty rapidly. It's been declining rapidly really since about 2010. In 2010, 62% of Americans identified with some religious community. That has now dipped under 50%, 49%. Now, that wasn't part of the Pew survey. That was general. I mean, that wasn't part of the Jewish American survey. That was a different survey. But so there is a declining affiliation with religious organizations. Now, why that's happening is the big question. And by the way, at the end, I'm going to tell you why I actually think we're seeing a mini renaissance right now, actually. So, remember, one thing to always keep in mind is demographics is not destiny. These are snapshots. It doesn't absolutely define where we're going. So that's one major discovery. And then we're going to go back and discuss each of these. Second major discovery, increasing divide between Orthodox and non-Orthodox Jews. It's happening deeply. One key metric of this is that in 2013, 53% of the Orthodox community voted Republican. In 2020, 82%. So you've seen this tremendous political divergence because the Orthodox have become much more conservative, whereas the non-Orthodox have basically stayed the same, between about 70 to 80% support for Democrats. So you see this tremendous political divide, which exacerbates and spreads into other areas. Another area where Orthodox affiliation rates for those under 30 dwarf non-Orthodox. So the younger you get in the demographic survey, so right now, Reform Judaism is still the largest movement in America. Reform Jews are about 36% of Americans, conservative is about 17%, and Orthodox is about 10%. So, and that's pretty much held for a while. It used to be, conservative movement used to be larger than the Reform movement. That shifted about 20 years ago. But Orthodox have generally stayed about 10%. However, the younger you get, the smaller the difference between Reform and Orthodox in terms of percentages. So it's essentially the Orthodox are growing at a younger level. And there's a variety of reasons for that. By the way, this is also the Orthodox would probably be a much larger percentage of the American Jewish population, except a significant number moved to Israel. The Orthodox would probably be 20 to 25% of the American Jewish population, because they have grown, the Orthodox have grown much faster than the other movements. One of the reasons is Orthodox Jewish schools. It used to be that many who grew up Orthodox would become conservative or reform. That doesn't happen much anymore because of day schools. But many Orthodox move to Israel, and so that reduces the percentage of the population in America. I mean, we see that. I mean, our previous executive director, Alan Litwack, he's got 2 kids. One of them moved to Israel. In most Orthodox families, at least one child moves to Israel at some point, often more, and often parents go later. So, but the point is that the Orthodox community is growing and it is younger. And that's a significant trend. And there is an increasing division between Orthodox and Reform. In fact, 17% of Jews 18 to 29 in America identify as Orthodox, compared to just 3% of those over 65. That's very, very interesting. Very interesting. Now, a third key finding is that people are more worried about anti-Semitism. More worried. That in 2013, that was a very minute concern. Isn't that interesting? It was it was on people's radar screens. People knew there was anti-Semitism, but it has grown tremendously. In 3/4 of American Jews say there's significantly more anti-Semitism than there was 5 years ago. And more than half of Jews, including 61% of visible Jews, that means people who will proudly answer I'm Jewish in a survey, say that they feel less safe today than they felt 5 years ago. Very interesting. Half of American Jews said the Democratic Party was friendly to Jews, while just 10% said it was unfriendly. In contrast, 37% said Trump was unfriendly to Jews, and 26% said the same with the Republican Party. This question exposed one of the sharpest denominational divides, with only 2% of Orthodox Jews saying that Trump was unfriendly to Jews, and 60% saying taking a favorable view of the GOP. Politics is infusing everything, including Jewish life. So, okay, so we've got those 3 findings so far. So decline in affiliation, increasing tension between Orthodox and non-Orthodox, a greater awareness and concern over anti-Semitism. Another key finding is the presence of Jews of color. Now, this, first of all, I don't particularly like that term. Some people love it, some people don't, but that's the sort of terminology that's used. Jews of color essentially refers to anybody who is not a white Ashkenazic or Sephardic Jew. So somebody who is Asian Jewish, Black Jewish, Hispanic Jewish, Native American Jewish. Now, that percentage of the population has gone up, but it has gone up very slightly. Some people thought it was going to go up huge. It has not. It is about 8% of the Jewish population identify as Hispanic, Black, or Asian. Interestingly, though, it is greater among younger Jews. So under 30, it is 13%, whereas overall it is 8%. So that is an interesting trend, one that the reform movement is very attuned to. The reform movement has done a lot of work doing outreach to Jews of color. It's a very interesting question whether that percentage will grow or not. Where that comes from, some of it's conversion, some of it is just, marriage. If you have if somebody got married 30 years ago and it was an intercultural, interracial marriage and they have children, they now identify as Jews and do so in as Jews of color. One other interesting finding, and this should give people very positive feeling about what we do, is that whereas the intermarriage rate has gone up significantly, and some people might say, oh, that's horrible, the number of the percentage of interfaith families that want to give their child Judaism is 70%. So 70% of those who are intermarried want Judaism. I mean, that's incredible. I mean, if you think of it on a positive perspective, I mean, that is that was never that high. That's gone up significantly. And part of it is people are more, even though we're more worried, there's so many paradoxes, right? That paradoxes are, even though we're more worried about anti-Semitism, more families are very accepting of Jews. There are very, you could say, waspy establishment families that have Jewish members. I've certainly met people that, I did a wedding once a few years ago. Guy was a staunch Catholic, and very involved in their church, and almost like you could just tell in conversations that was not a huge fan of Jews. The wedding was at Shore Acres, a country club in Lake Forest. I don't know if any of you have heard of that. It is like, it's not a place where you would naturally have a Jewish wedding. Okay, let me just put it that way. It's beautiful. I had a wonderful time, but it's. However, that was where we had the wedding. His grandchildren are Jewish. Proudly, they go to Jewish preschool, and so this is an example of a sort of a sea change in American Jewish life. And I think that's a big positive. So there's a lot of positives and a lot of negatives. Now, I've kind of given you some of the key overall findings, and I want to go into explaining each one. But before I do that, do you have any questions or comments now? I'll take it now, and then we'll go into each one.
You can raise your hand virtually. Okay, Lynn Salad, go ahead.
Lynn, I haven't seen you in a while. It's good to see you.
You need to unmute.
Evan, my grandson comes every Sunday morning. I have to say,
Of course,
that's a bigger pull.
Of course, no question.
Anyway, at the Jewish high school, Rochelle Giselle now called Jewish high school. One of the former teachers moved, but she was doing her master's thesis on this topic of why young people are drawn to Orthodoxy. Mm-hmm. And she concluded that the structure of Orthodoxy is what draws a lot of young people in this age of unpredictability and instability. Orthodoxy provides them a safe environment and a predictable environment. And I thought that was really interesting. We have a cousin who has been drawn to, she was raised by an interfaith, our cousins were interfaith marriage, and was drawn to Orthodoxy and is living in Israel with 5 little boys. Oh. And they were in the outreach program at Madison, and they're very much into it. And she was educated and was an engineer, and now she's back working because they can't afford. No. Her husband is studying, all the time. So I think what we've seen is that the rules give them a feeling of
It's
comfort.
psychological.
Yeah.
The world is a tough place. The world is a tough place. It's especially now. I mean, it is, unless you are born with, I mean, you know, many in our community, we're lucky, you know, we have certain privileges we're born with. We have good, you know, often good parents, can go to good schools and get a stable job and so forth. A lot of people can't. The world is hard. And and it's hard even if you get a lot of privileges, you know, so, you know, and the structure and definition and a clear path on how to live is comforting for a lot of people. And so I agree with you. That's a big part of it. That's a big part of it. And some people, they're just psychologically, it's necessary. You know, we all have different psyches. We all have different needs. Some people like a lot of structure. You know, we all know people that you go to their house and there's not a thing out of place. Everyone sits in the exact same spot. You know, there's structure. Other people, it's a little more, you know, we have different personalities. So I think that's a big part of it. Okay, Lee.
Hi, it's actually Jeff.
Oh, Jeff.
Yeah, hi. I'm just wondering if the study had anything on the perceptions, whether they're the same or different, of Israel between within the study.
Yes, I mean, that is one of the areas where there is a big divide between Orthodox and non-Orthodox. It didn't go into a lot of the details, but here's a little bit about it. Very few Jews are in favor of boycott, divestment, sanctions, the BDS movement. But I mean, 10% of Jews are in favor, so that's kind of, you know, worrisome. But you know, there are always outliers in any survey. So in general, this, you know, Jews remain pro-Israel and pro-two-state. One of the key divides is in attitudes towards settlements and in attitude towards Trump, essentially, that Orthodox were maximalist, you know, 90% plus, you know, pro sort of Trumpian vision of Israel. Remember, this is done in 2020, so it's, you know, different time period. This statistic caught me off guard. And in fact, I was talking about it with Ari last night, and I can sort of understand it, but in some ways I can't. Here's few Jews believe that either Israeli or Palestinian leadership is sincere about achieving a peace settlement, with a total of 33% of Jews saying that Israel is sincere and 12% saying the same about Palestinian officials. So not a lot of trust in the Israeli government and even less trust in the Palestinian government. Interesting. Now, this is what that question was strongly correlated with level of education. 51% of those with a high school education or less, and these are Jews, so that's not a big number of people with a high school education or less. Let's just be honest. That's a small percentage of the Jewish community. There's some, but it's relatively small. 51% of those with a high school education or less believed Israel was sincere, while just 21% of those with postgraduate degrees said the same. So essentially, the more educated you are, the more suspicious you are of the Israeli government. I mean, I kind of understand that, but it's also worrisome in some degree that the more educated one becomes, the more kind of suspicious of Israel one becomes. I can understand it, but I don't like it. So we can go into that more later. But Sue, go ahead.
Okay, on the subject of intermarriage, I can't remember exactly where I read this, but quite a few years ago, I read a statistic that said, first of all, when parents have intermarried, it gives the children permission to do the same.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
And the other thing is that when there are children of intermarried parents who even may be raised in the Jewish tradition, by the next generation, and as it goes down, they are completely lost to Judaism. Now, whether that is still true, I do not know, but I would like you to comment on that.
Yeah, it certainly is true that the first part of what you said is definitely true, that the intermarriage rate of those who have intermarried parents is higher. There's no question about that. Although essentially it's merging, you know, there's essentially there is going to be very little, and I predict this will happen in the future, there will be very little difference between intermarried families and two Jewish families in non-Orthodox Judaism. That difference is getting smaller. Now, the question about, is Judaism lost in the next generation? I have read that too, but I think that's very old. Those are old surveys. Because in some ways, the fact that the Jewish community has responded and welcomed intermarried families has essentially changed that trajectory. That there are plenty of people who, if the Jewish community wasn't well, I mean, Birthright, for example, Birthright was essentially founded, its unspoken purpose was to get Jews to marry other Jews. Essentially, that was its unspoken purpose 20 years ago. Now, intermarried kids who are one Jewish parent are absolutely welcome on Birthright. There's a lot of interfaith kids, and it includes patrilineal kids. It's not just matrilineal; it's patrilineal. So they're essentially taking the Reform definition. Are all welcome. So the shift in our attitudes has really changed what the trajectory will be. I mean, I can just tell you, I did a wedding last night. We had several congregants were there. I did a wedding with a priest who's one of my very close friends. I can guarantee you they are going to join a synagogue. And in fact, the brother-in-law comes to our High Holy Day services. They have a 9-week-old baby. So this is a brother-in-law of the bride who's Jewish, are joining our synagogue. So, you know, even though for the groom who's Catholic, you know, he's Boston Irish Catholic, it was important to have a priest, and I loved it. It's a lot of fun. But, you know, this is 20 years ago, a rabbi wouldn't do this. And there are plenty of rabbis today who wouldn't do it, including, you know, there are some rabbis who would say they're welcoming to interfaith families and still wouldn't do it. Fine. Everyone has their own, you know, has their own understanding. That's fine. But I feel like that is a welcoming gesture that brings people into the synagogue. And interestingly, this might not be politically correct to say, but it's true. I mean, I in some ways, if the mother, I don't know what the statistics on gay families are and so forth, but if the mother is Jewish, it actually increases the likelihood that the children are going to be raised Jewish. And essentially, if the mother's Catholic, it increases the likelihood that they're going to be raised Catholic. So unless I know plenty of Catholic mothers who decide, okay, we're going to raise the children Jewish, and then it's Jewish and it's full Jewish. So essentially, what I guess a lot of the religious nature of the household decisions are made by the mother. It's just true. Maybe it's not, you know, what it should be, but it is what it is. So that is another key factor. Other questions, and then we'll go Sue and then Lynn. Unmute, Sue.
Oh, I had already spoken, Evan.
Oh,
No,
no.
no.
Yeah. Go ahead, Sue Pinsky Gardner. Oh, we can't. Vanessa, can you tell her to unmute?
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. One of the things you talked about before is non-Jews being a little more accepting. You talked about the Shores Country Club, you know, and how people are a little more accepting of Jews. Are you also finding, and I'm finding with many of my Reform friends who have been very active in synagogue life, nobody's sticking their head in the oven anymore if their children are marrying out of the Jewish faith. That seems to be going by the wayside. People seem to be much more accepting of a non-Jewish spouse, and they will go along with it. And the children frequently are raised Jewish by children who've had full Jewish educations, but I don't hear the renting of their clothes because it's happening so much anymore. Am I right?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I mean, that's without question. I mean, partly because it's reality, you know, and they're essentially, it is very few people in the reform movement see intermarriage as a bad thing. Maybe one could see, you know, I think it's not though, we haven't lost any sense of values. We still have values, but the value is you raise a child, you make Judaism a part of one's life. And intermarriage is not a barrier to doing that. Maybe 40 years ago, it was a barrier, but it's not a barrier today. And so, yeah, I would say 100%. I mean, by the way, and it's even true in the conservative movement. Not, you know, the conservative movement has a little more divergence, but and some synagogues are more, but the intermarriage rate, the difference between a conservative synagogue and a reform synagogue is minimal. So I predict the conservative movement will sort of head in that direction as well. But yeah, there's really no embarrassment, no concern about that at all. Yeah, good. We had one more comment, and then I'll go back into looking at the different surveys. Lynn?
Evan, for a long time, even at Solel, there was no the rabbis would not intermarry couples.
Yeah.
What is the evolution of that? That was a dictate, wasn't it, from the Reform Council or something, that Reform rabbis would not intermarry couples? I think that turned off a lot of couples. They said, if I can't get married, you know, if the rabbi won't marry me, why bother? You know, and I know some couples who sort of went by the wayside in terms of religion because of that practice. At what point did the Reform Council permit rabbis to intermarry, or have they not still?
So good question. There was never, Reform rabbis were always free to marry interfaith couples. That was all. There wasn't the only thing essentially Reform rabbis aren't allowed to do is you know, sexual misconduct and stealing, you know, but so that can, those can get you kicked out, but essentially, you can, in 1972, the movement passed a resolution discouraging rabbis from participating. So, but it wasn't a mandate. And even back then, there were a few rabbis, like the guy who was at the Jeremiah, Tarshish. He was doing interfaith weddings in the 70s.
Right.
So yeah, so there were people. What changed, and essentially, starting in about 2007, is when I kind of see it. You see more and more rabbis starting to do it, starting to officiate. Until now, it's over 50% of Reform rabbis will officiate in an interfaith wedding. And the movement passed a resolution about 10 years ago saying, we don't take a position either way. So they essentially rescinded the old order discouraging it, but they didn't pass anything saying it's a positive thing. I mean, me personally, if I were the head of the Reform movement, I would say we should encourage rabbis to do it, and we should encourage welcoming. But people don't have guts or vision, unfortunately. You know, it's people aren't willing to you know, to put themselves out there, because there will be a lot of if you did that, there would be a lot of rabbis who would criticize that. There are rabbis who would say, I am not comfortable doing an interfaith wedding, and the fact that the Reform movement discourages it gives me protection.
Right.
So,
right.
you know, which, okay, I can sympathize with that. You know, I mean, congregations, congregations are forbidden from asking a rabbi, if you're interviewing a rabbi, whether they perform interfaith marriages. Every congregation now essentially asks that question. Maybe they phrase it differently, but they get the answer, but they're technically not supposed to. So it is still a sensitive issue, but I think views have changed significantly. Okay.
Gail, and then Sandy and David.
Yeah, just a very short vignette from the other end of the life cycle. There was a couple that left Solel because they had purchased plots in Shalom Memorial Park, and then they discovered that she could not be buried there because she wasn't Jewish.
Yes, that is a good point. There are Jewish cemeteries where in their charter, in the essentially the bylaws, they are not allowed to sell to somebody not Jewish, and that includes Shalom. Now, Shalom, what they do, I've dealt with this before. They have another essentially cemetery that's under a different set of bylaws called, I think it's called Rand Hill, and you can have, if it's an interfaith wedding, you can have the Jewish partner buried in what's technically Shalom, and the non-Jewish partner buried in technically Rand Hill, and they're next to each other. So, but if you buy plots in a certain section of Shalom that's not near Rand Hill, that's impossible. There's a very good point. And that has been an issue for Jewish cemeteries lately.
Sandy?
I just wanted to say kol hakavod to Rabbi for his stance on the intermarriage.
Yeah.
I really appreciate that. And that's why we're members of Makom.
No, thank you. Well, and I think Rabbi Sarada and I are lucky we're on the same page on this issue, and it is. I think it's, I feel passionately about it, and I didn't always. I mean, I kind of just got lucky that my first pulpit was downtown Chicago, and I had so many interfaith couples, and I said, well, if I want to connect with these couples, I've got to be open to it, and kind of got lucky in that way. Thank you.
We all have to encourage our young people to come and make them feel welcome.
I can tell you, because this is not unpublic knowledge, but Mishkan, which is sort of a very hip synagogue for younger Jews in Chicago, often not Reform Jews, because it's more like a conservative synagogue, but it's very popular. Their rabbi is ordained by the conservative movement, but she left the rabbinical assembly, which is the conservative movement's rabbinical arm, and the synagogue will not affiliate with the conservative movement because she officiates at interfaith weddings, and she also co-officiates, like I do, and like Rabbi Sarada does, with priests, which is unheard of for a conservative rabbi. But that's probably one of the reasons that synagogue grows, is that it's totally unequivocally welcoming.
Agreed. Andy, you need to unmute, and then Maxine.
So this subject of death and cemeteries was a very big issue when I was on a board at another temple. And I mean, it really almost tore the board. It was just so ugly. But what I'm wondering is, one of the things that was brought out was that they were asking people actually to lie. If you just keep it quiet and you don't let someone know that was the cemetery rule. If you don't come out and say it, and one family had a child that died and they couldn't, it was a lot of very, to me, unkind. And anyway, I don't have to go into all of the details, except that I'm wondering how is that true, that the cemeteries don't require, if you don't say you're not Jewish?
That's a very interesting question. You're like almost like a don't ask, don't tell policy.
Exactly. Right.
I would imagine they probably, the cemeteries want to get their money. They want to get the burial. And yeah, my guess is if you didn't say anything, they wouldn't push it. I don't know. Shalom though is a little stricter. I once did a service, and it was an interfaith family, and this wasn't interfaith. What they were strict about, I couldn't go to the cemetery and the family was fine. They wanted to do, and they were like, no, the rabbi has to be present at the cemetery, even though we did the whole service at the synagogue. So Shalom may be a little stricter, but I would imagine some of the other ones would be fine as long as you didn't say anything.
And they went further with it, saying that we were sending a message to our children that interfaith marriage was just fine. I mean, as if our kids even think they were going to die at that point.
Right. Yeah. Well, synagogue boards, we're very lucky. We have a good one, but they can have some problems.
Yeah. Thank you, Andy. Maxine, and you need to unmute.
Okay. Hi. I had a couple of comments. I got married in 1965 in Boston to an Episcopalian. No rabbi in Boston would marry us. My father had to send for a rabbi from New York, I forget his name, who it started with a K, I think, but I don't really remember. So that goes to show you that it was verboten at that time. And then we both have two children. Mike married a Jewish woman, and both his kids were raised Jewish. I married an Episcopalian. Both my kids were raised Jewish. Both our daughters are raising their children Jewish. Both our sons, married non-Jews, they are doing actually nothing. So they're nothing. So that goes to, give you more information. Okay, that's it.
That's very interesting. Yeah, I mean, to me, the worst thing is when you do nothing, and it happens. And I wish, it's hard to get around that. It's hard sometimes to get families. Like what I'll do is sometimes if there's confusion, I sometimes say, pick one. I don't care if you pick Catholic, great. Give a child some sort of religious identity, but nothing, that's often the default. And it's hard. I know so many good people that really just end up doing nothing. Now, that doesn't mean, there's plenty of kids who grew up with nothing who are wonderful, wonderful things. But, I think sometimes it misses out on the richness of Jewish tradition. Or Catholic tradition, if that's what somebody chooses, or Protestant. But that's quite interesting. Now, actually, that's a good segue, because I want to delve into a couple of so one of the first findings, as I said earlier, was that people are affiliating with liberal religion and in the Christian community with evangelical religion at much lower percentages. Now, part of that is, so there's a lot of causes for that. And I was researching, earlier this week to try to understand, why are people less connected with organized religion today, even than it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 50 years ago? So there are a few reasons. One is a very broad trend that's probably 200 years old, is that our society has become more secular. There is no way of since the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment and the rise of the nation state in the 18th, 19th centuries, societies have become less religious. It's just overall trend. And even in the 1950s, I was reading a book a couple of days ago that was written in the 50s. And even in that book, the 50s are considered an age of religious renaissance in America. It's filled with comments about how people are less religious than they were a generation ago. Why is organized religion declining? So even in times where, that you thought it was actually a good period, the overall trend over the last 200 years is secularization. And the interesting thing today is things happen, social changes happen much faster now than they did 20 years ago. They did 20 years. Think about gay marriage. That's one example. People's views on gay marriage changed rapidly. Look, think about people's views on smoking took like 40 years to change. People's views on gay marriage changed like that. And so I think so the decline in religion is happening more rapidly now. That shows sort of the changes over the last 10 years. So I think one is just this broad social decline in the importance of religion. And that makes sense, right? Religion used to explain a lot of the way the world worked. Now we have science and other things. So that's one. Second is more cultural in that religious extremism gave religion generally a bad name. So a lot of times, especially in the 1990s, where you had the religious right that, demonized abortion, demonized gay people, so on. And now that's all changed. So a lot of people who my age, who grew up during that time as sort of the moral majority and so forth, they associate religion with intolerance, with hatred, and so are just totally uninterested in it. And that is, there are a lot of studies that prove this. And so in an era of diversity and tolerance, religion, wrongfully in my opinion, but look, I can't control what people think, is associated with that kind of intolerance. So people are just less likely to connect and to feel a connection. And look at what happened with vaccines. Look at how in Israel, the people, Israel is a highly vaccinated nation, but those who didn't get vaccinated are the ultra-Orthodox. And that creates, and look at, I think in America, most ultra-Orthodox are vaccinated actually. So there is a difference in America, but still, rightfully or wrongly, the perception is that the people who aren't getting vaccinated, who are standing in the way of progress and so forth, are ultra-religious. So that gives religion a bad name among younger people, rightly or wrongly. I'm not saying all of this is true. I'm just saying this perception. So that's another. Another is just generally, people have more things to do with their time, especially before COVID. 100 years ago, if you wanted to find some meaning on a Sunday morning, the only thing you could do was go hear a lecture at your synagogue or church. Now, we're lucky you're all here with me today, but you could be out, you could be going to a concert, you could be going downtown, you could be doing all kinds of stuff. And so religion essentially is competing with many other activities. And that leads to just a decline in affiliation. And this actually, I'll just mention it now, I was going to mention it at the end, but I actually think we are going to see a mini renaissance in religious commitment post-COVID. We already saw it. I don't want to toot our own horn here, but we have 50 new families in our congregation this year. 50 new families. Now, that is awesome, and there are a lot of reasons for that. I think part of it is coming out of COVID, people found, after quarantine, people found comfort in community. There's something that is especially meaningful about a synagogue and about kind of almost back to the basics about what's most important in life. And we saw greater participation in events over the last year. Some of it is, okay, if there's no Ravinia, maybe I will go on Friday night. Okay, all right. So some of it is just, our competition was shut down for a while. But I think another part of it is what we offer, people have realized how important it is. And so I actually think there's some hope for the future in that trend. Okay.
I want to thank our clergy. I said, listen, there's no sports, there's no nothing. Let's go. And we offered classes and everyone came, and they, our clergy and Ashley and myself, we stepped up and we offered it, and you'll hear more about that later. But now Evie and then one of the Schuberts, I'm going to say Jeff. Evie, you go ahead, and then Jeff. Evie, you need to unmute.
Yeah, I think one of the differences, having run the whole gamut of being involved in all the different realms of Judaism, I think one of the reasons for the growth in Reform Judaism, from my perspective, is we don't stress the R word. We don't stress religious. It's more a sense of community and more inclusive, and you can find your place within the Reform movement if you be a little bit more observant or finding the God concept in different ways. And I just think it's more welcoming that way, not to belittle any of the others, because I think there's certainly a place for all of them. But I personally do see more of a melding between all of them, which I certainly appreciate. I mean, I remember back in the days when Hebrew was just not accepted in our early days at Solel, and that was kind of a turnoff to me because Hebrew is very important to my background. Whereas I just think that there's more breadth at this point, and I too want to publicly acknowledge all the effort that was put into keeping us together this year and a half or whatever it's been.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me
Jeff.
say, but let me respond a
Okay,
little bit.
sorry.
Here, Abby. You are so right that, and this may sound sort of paradoxical, but we American Jews are not very religious. We're not. The statistics bear this out. The number of Jews who say they believe in God, whatever that means, okay, is like 53%. Whereas the number of American non-Jews who say believe in God is 90%. And yet 90% of American Jews are proud to be Jewish. So here's something really interesting from Pew. I'm just reading an article that was commenting on it. In Pew's landmark 2013 study, the term Jews of no religion was coined to describe what was then considered a surprising number of Jewish Americans who did not relate their Jewish identity to religious belief or practice. The 2020 report underscores the same disconnect. Only 1 in 5 Jews surveyed told Pew that religion is very important to them. That compares to 2 in 5 Americans overall. Look, I don't like that statistic very much. I mean, we want Jews to affiliate. However, perhaps I think it reflects the fact that to be Jewish is so much bigger than just religion. It's culture, it's philosophy, it's a language, Hebrew, it is learning. Religion is just one small component of what it means to be Jewish. And I think this survey puts that, highlights that. Yeah. Okay. Jeff?
Sure. Hi. Yeah, I just have a comment and a question, I guess. The first one was when you said things were 40 years ago, which coincidentally next month is our 40th anniversary. And at that time, there were 3 rabbis in the Chicago area that I knew of who would perform mixed marriages. One was Rabbi Friedman up in Deerfield.
Sure.
And I think the other one, there was Rabbi Joyce, who was in Oak Park. And then there was Rabbi Arnold Kamen down on Culver Mead, and he actually performed our ceremony. So yeah, things have changed. The other thing is I wonder how much of not becoming affiliated is part of not becoming involved in community organizations in general. Because, yesterday I was watching TV and there's, an ad for the Shriners Hospital. How many Shriners do you know? How many, my uncles were Masons, how many Masons? Rotary Club, Kiwanis, Elks. It's just in general, it seems participation in these types of organizations is down and people are more, I don't know.
Yes, no question. In 1990, there was a famous book written by Robert Putnam called Bowling Alone. And it was all about how the number of people who go bowling has gone up, but the number of people who belong to bowling leagues has gone down. And he used that as a proxy to say decline in religion. And I think that's only exacerbated. We can get everything we want on our devices. I mean, you got everything you need right here. However, I actually think COVID is a partial reversal of that we realize community is important. The thing though, is that how we create community has changed. What we define as community is totally, it changes, and I think, so I think all human beings are social animals, that doesn't mean we're all extroverted and introverted, but we need other people. It's community. So people find community. It's just how they find that, I think, is always changing.
Rabbi, we had a question, and I was thinking this myself. When you say that we're not religious, but what's the difference between religious and observant?
Okay, yeah, this is a huge. So I think it means different things to different people. I think observant is a more narrow term. Observant means you follow the mitzvot. You could actually be observant and not religious. There are Orthodox people, I know a few, who they call themselves orthoprax, where they say, well, we just follow the commandments, but we do so because that's just what I grew up with and it's comfortable. I don't really believe in God, but I just follow the mitzvot. That's observant, but not religious. I think religious in this sense is you actually essentially believe what the prayers are saying. If I want to put it bluntly, however, I mean, there's a lot of variety in that, but that you feel there is a God in the universe, that God is part of human affairs. However, that doesn't mean God controls everything, but there's that you believe in some sense that God wants us to read Torah. Now it's a very hard question. That's a very hard question to answer because all these terms are so ambiguous. But in general, I would say in general, it is, do you identify essentially your Judaism as more cultural or as more religious? And, I think most of us probably here on this call, it's an element of both, but a lot of people, or how do you do your Passover Seder? Maybe that's another good proxy. Is your Passover Seder simply like, yes, we get to eat matzo ball soup? Or is your Passover Seder have some element of the Haggadah and some religious element? If you have no religious element at all, you are totally secular. If you have some, you're both. If it's mostly religious and, then you're fully religious. And I think that's maybe another good proxy. Yeah.
Well, we got 2 more minutes. I have a couple of announcements, but Rabbi, wrap it up for us.
Okay. What I want to wrap up is, I think that I want to wrap up with a couple of lessons that I think all of us can take from this. One is demographics are not destiny. So in the 1950s, it was universally believed by sociologists that Orthodox Judaism was going to die. That was, you read all the studies. And by the way, even the Israeli government, David Ben-Gurion only exempted the Orthodox from military service because he thought it would be irrelevant, that there would be so few of them that there would be a couple of hundred people that were exempt from military service. And so what's the big deal? He was wrong on that. So demographics are not destiny. And I think that's always important to keep in mind. Second thing is that I think, especially since there are so many Jews of no religion, and but we still want community. Synagogues have to adapt, and we are. Look at this. Think about what our synagogue, we have this whole community commitment model, different than a dues model. We adapted to Zoom and so forth. I'm generally when I first was reading this Pew study, I was pretty pessimistic. I was like, oh, great. Organized religion is declining. Why did I go into this profession? There's, you think, okay, is there a future here? I actually think there is a tremendous future, but it's not going to look like what it was 10 years ago, 5 years ago, even. It's going to constantly evolve. I think that's a great thing. And so that's why I think, to me, visionary, real leadership, you take a stand and you take risks. You could be wrong. I say, the Reform movement should say all rabbis should do interfaith marriages. Great. I could be wrong. That could be a bad move, but at least you try something and you go out there and you really take a stand. So I think adapting and changing and doing kind of big things has to happen. And then if it doesn't work, then you change again. You can adapt and do things differently. And third, I actually think that the non-Orthodox movements will eventually become one. I could be totally wrong on this, but essentially I see a future in which there is a kind of reform and conservative movements are one. There are more liberal congregations as that movement, which we would probably be. And there are more traditional congregations in that movement, which let's say Bethel and Highland Park would be. But we're all general. I mean, it's already in some ways true. You know, they have different organizational structures and different camps and so forth, but essentially the points of view are pretty close. So I think that happens. Probably it takes a while. I'd say 20, 30 years, but I definitely see that happening in the future.
That is definitely happening in Israel. And they're, you know, call it, you know, the progressive movement. And funny you should mention that, because on September 19th, Rabbi Josh Weinberg will be here, and he's going to talk about prospects for hope, the current Israeli government and the reform movement. So if you want to know more about that, you should come back on September 19th. And we're starting to begin at 10 a.m. So in September, and Rabbi Moffic, please put that in your calendar that we're going to start at 10 a.m. And don't tell me you're going to be here at 10:30. Okay, Andy, you have a question and you need to unmute. You still need to unmute.
Yeah, now I'm okay.
There you
now.
go.
I just wanted to offer a support for the trends that you are talking about in the Jewish world. It is the same thing in the climate world. Everything is going so fast and we can't keep up. That's why we can only at this point adapt and look to mitigate. And I think look at the speed of our world, everything is like that. And it's what is. And so I think you're offering the right observation and the right direction as to what we must do. I mean, otherwise we're just swimming upstream. We're lost. We're lost. And that's how our world is. And
yeah. Andy, thank you for that reminder. And I have a few other reminders for everyone. You don't want to wait till September 19th. Come this afternoon to Macomb Solal Lakeside. We have a Kona ice truck. Our school families will be coming, but come on down. Also, if you're interested in Mahjong, I'm going to put the link in the chat. We're starting Mahjong on Thursdays. There's the form. And Tuesday night, we have Preparing for the High Holy Days with Rabbi Sarada, I'm pretty sure, or it might be, and then the next week it's Rabbi Moffic. So please, look at your emails, or if you need a link, see me.
And Canasta, Mahjong and Canasta.
Oh, thank you, Holly. I don't know how I could forget the canasta. That is on me. That is on me. It's Mahjong and canasta. And it's Rabbi Sarada this Tuesday. Thank you so much. We really look forward to seeing everyone. If you need help with your community commitment or getting your high holidays all set up, please feel free to call the office, look at the website. And it's just great to see everyone here this morning as we're in the month of Elul and we're preparing for the High Holy Days. Thank you, everyone. Special thanks to Rabbi Moffic.
thank you.
Be well. Bye-bye.
This was terrific.